We'll grill you, Kyle.
What lake is this?
Chautauqua Lake.
Chautauqua.
Muskie, you must go lunch.
I fish with dynamite, man. I don't fish.
That's good.
Boat?
Don't boat, don't fish. I ride motorcycles and drive a race car. That's about it.
And you do it very well. But that's a good segue to the first question. And the first question is, really, should it have been football or basketball? You're such a great athlete.
Here's the thing. I loved basketball. Couldn't play, but I loved it. Football, I enjoyed football, but I didn't like getting hit. That's why I chose to be a race car driver. During the day, you only get hit once in a race, and then you get to go home. In football, you get hit a multitude of times. I wasn't interested in getting hit that much.
You were quite the athlete going through school.
I wouldn't say that. As some people may, but I wouldn't say. I just had a good time. I grew up in a very small school, in a small school district. There were 83 kids in my graduating class. We were, at that time in North Carolina, we were what was considered single A ball. So everybody played everything. The same group played basketball, that played football, that played baseball, that ran track, and that's really all we had at that time. So, it was funny. We never had two-a-days. It's funny to hear people talk about two-a-days. Some of the two-a-days that we had basically consisted of guys that were farmers and guys that weren't farmers, and the guys that didn't belong to a farm family would go out and help this farm family get up hay in the morning so you could practice football in the afternoon, because if you didn't help them get up hay or you didn't help them work in tobacco, then you didn't have enough people to practice football in the afternoon. So we never had two-a-days.
Did your dad and grandfather, were they encouraging insofar as that sports?
It's strange. We just where you choose what you want to do, and we're behind you 100%, and we'll help you do whatever you want to do to the best of your ability. And it just so happens that when you're in school, I just wanted to do everything, and so I was probably never 100% at any of it, but I enjoyed doing it.
At some point, there had to be an aha moment where, gee, I've watched Grandpa drive, I've seen my dad so involved, where, all right, I am going to follow this lead.
You would think, but really not. And here's what I tell most everybody. I was 9 or 10 years old before I realized everybody's father didn't have a race car. I just thought that's what everybody did. It just never dawned on me that there were other jobs out there, because I never wanted to be a fireman or a policeman or be an astronaut when I was coming along. I just thought everybody had race cars. And it was strange. I grew up in, like I said, in a rural community where everybody was farmers, dairy farm, tobacco farm, but everybody in our community were farmers. We just happened to farm race cars. My grandfather was a race car driver and built them and raced them. My father came along, and that's what he did. And those farms have been passed on from generation to generation. So I just assumed from the time I was very young that this is what I would get passed on to, was to be a race car driver at some point in time.
Did your grandfather sit down and say, Kyle, this is how I got started?
No. My grandfather didn't start racing until late in life.
Right.
He was 37, 38, 39 years old. And basically he had lived a whole lifetime before that, working different jobs, working in different industries and stuff. And really to that time then, obviously that's when NASCAR started in the late 40s, so he decided he'd be a race car driver. And he really only raced, even though he was injured in '61 at Daytona, he really only raced a period of about 12 or 13 years, very short period of time. My father, I think from a very early age, once my grandfather started, he knew that's what he was going to be. Right. So I don't think my grandfather we never really talked about saying, this is how I did it, or this is why I did it, or this is the way I did it. The sport had changed so much from when that came along to when my father started, and even when my father started to when I came along and started, and it's changed drastically from the time since I started.
Your grandfather raced here.
Yes.
Your dad came here a couple of times for sports dinners, and so with your appearance, this is sort of the hat trick, using another sports metaphor. And talk about that change. I mean, you talked about the fact when your grandfather, you talk about almost the good old boy circuit, Dukes of Hazzard type thing.
Yeah.
Is that a correct?
Oh yeah, at the time, and that's where the sport came from. We can talk about it's funny for me to be around the sport now, and to be around people that are new fans, because history is a funny thing. At some point in time, no matter what history it is, everybody wants to rewrite it, and they want to eliminate all all what they consider at that period of time the politically incorrect part.
Right.
Okay, I tell people, if you want to be politically correct, this sport was started in the and they were in the beverage transportation business. Okay, that's the way this sport started. Really, they just ran liquor,
Right.
so that's the way it was. And it was a southern sport, and that's the way this sport was started. And you can't take away from that. That's just where it was. It was run dirt tracks, short tracks all across the southeastern part of the United States. Now we did venture up into the Northeast and venture up into this area, and they went out into the Midwest, and yeah, they'd go to California, but still the heart and soul of the sport was in the Southeast. The way the sport has really changed is basically we're like any other sports industry now. When you look at the NFL, when you look at the NBA, when you look at Major League Baseball, when you look at the NHL, it doesn't make any difference. We market race now. That's why we race in Chicago. That's why we race in Kansas City. That's why we race in LA. That's why we race in Dallas. That's where the major markets are, which eliminated some of the tracks that I grew up with, like the North Wilkesboros or like the Rockingham, North Carolina, some of the tracks that we've really gotten away from. So the sport's changed, and it changed from when my grandfather started, because like you say, he raced up here. Well, my father, by the time he started racing, and the schedule had really found its way to be 70 races and then down to about 32 or 33 races a year, the sport had evolved into something totally different than it was when my grandfather started. And once again, 20, 30 years later, it's evolved into something different again.
What's next for the race? I mean, you've kind of brought it up to this point. What's
Don't have a clue.
10 years from now?
Don't have a clue. It's funny because I read all the time in the paper. You read in the paper and you hear in the media that the TV numbers were down, during the Nextel Cup chase this year. And you look at that and you say, and people want to know, why are they down? It's a good question. To explain why something comes down, you have to explain why it went up in the first place.
Sure.
And nobody can really explain why this sport has really taken off. We can point to a lot of different things. We can point to TV and the media coverage that we get now with the Fox and the NBC, and now with ABC and ESPN. You can point to that and say that was huge. We can point to the Home Depots and the Coca-Colas and the General Mills and the Dodges, the companies that spend millions of dollars in marketing. That's putting the sport out there to different people. You can say, okay, that's a plus. You can point to the fact that we are racing in Chicago, we are racing in Kansas, we are racing in Dallas, places that are major markets, so there's more fans there. You can point to all that, but you can't really say it's one thing, it's this or it's that or the other. So when it goes down a little bit, I like to kind of say it's kind of, right now the sport is finding where it's at. It's kind of like the stock market during the internet bubble. It went up, it came down, it found its level, now it has to go again. And I think that's where we're at right now. I don't know where the sport can grow or will grow to, but I still think it has potential for growth. When you look at it, and NASCAR likes to espouse that there's 75 million fans out there, I may give you 35 million or 40 million, but I'm not going to give you 75 right now. I don't believe that number. But that still leaves a lot of room for growth. When you look at the number of individuals that are in the United States, but you look at the number of individuals that fit the demographics that can follow the sport and can enjoy the sport.
Your dad won more races than anybody in the history of this sport, took it to a whole new level of celebrity. How much is that a shadow on you?
None. I don't look at it that way. And it's funny. I guess I never have. Because if we were here and you were able to line my grandfather up and set him here, and then my father here and me here, and then even if we went over here and put Adam here, we're four totally different individuals. We just happen to do the same thing, but our individual personalities, the way we approach life, the way we approach racing, the way we approached what we were doing, is really different. And you can say we took the best or we took the worst or whatever, but it was really a different way of looking at things. So, from the very beginning, I didn't try to be Richard Petty, and I don't think there's only one Richard Petty, and there was only one Lee Petty, and in the end there'll be only one Kyle Petty, and there would have only been only one Adam. And I think when you look at it, that was the one thing that I think our family took from the sport as much as anything, and took from other things. I was very blessed my father didn't name me Richard Petty like Dale Earnhardt Jr. because it's been a heavy burden for Junior, and it is, and I think he feels that pressure sometimes. And most celebrities, when they have a child and they name their son or daughter or whatever, when it follows, and when you change that or you follow in the same naming footsteps, that is an added pressure. But to be Richard Petty's son Kyle Petty. We just happen to do the same thing, but I don't feel any. I've always looked at it as been a blessing and it's been a positive to be his son.
You mentioned all four of that generations all had kind of different attributes. If you had to put a word with Lee Petty, what would you put with that?
Stubborn. Stubborn. Yeah, he was just a stubborn guy who his main attribute was he raced for one. I'll lay it out like this, and I'll go around and talk sometimes. My grandfather raced for one reason, just to make money. That's what it was all about. It wasn't about trophies. It wasn't about the competition. It wasn't about winning. The winning part came from making the money. That's what it was all about. I think when you look at my father, he came along and he fell in love with the sport, and he fell in love with the people and the racing part of it. And he just absolutely loved it. I tell people all the time, if you look at me, you can just say lazy. They had already set the foundation, so it was easier for me just to be lazy. And I tell people, I just love the people. I love this sport. I grew up, and it's funny when you're around something, you learn even though you don't think you're learning. When I was 8 or 9 years old and hanging out at the race shop and going to the racetrack, and then became 10 or 12 and then became 15 and was on the pit crew when I was 15 years old, all of a sudden I got to be 18 or 19 and wanted to drive a race car, and I stopped and I said, now what do I have to learn? And I looked back and I thought, all you really got to do is learn to drive. You already know a lot about the car, you know a lot about building the car, you know a lot about the engine, you've already learned a lot. And it was like, I thought that was the point that I would start, but really I had started 15 years before that. And I think it was the same way with Adam. I think the love of the sport was passed on from my father to myself and to Adam. So I think when you look at it like that, it's just a passion for doing what we're doing.
You had mentioned your quote that Adam had.
Yeah, I did a little research today, Kyle, when I was online, and there were a couple quotes that your son had that I thought were particularly meaningful. One was pretty funny. I thought he said, my grandfather is the king. You probably might have heard this.
Yeah.
My grandfather's the king. My dad is the prince, so I must be the butler.
Yeah, exactly.
Does that must illustrate the kind of sense of humor that Adam demonstrated?
And he did. But you have to go into this with a sense of humor. Here's what I tell people too. It's a funny thing. We just ride around in circles. Okay? It's not, and it's a sport. I think so many people. You learn so many great life lessons playing sports. I'm very fortunate. Billy Race works for me, and his father was a coach here. And I think sports really, whether it's basketball or football or baseball or golf or team sport, it doesn't make any difference. I think that gives you a good aspect or a good perspective of life. It is a microcosm. But in the end, it's all just a game. We don't do anything important. We entertain. You know what I mean? And I tell people, and people want to say, oh, you drive a race car, that's this or that, or oh, you do. No, yeah. Hey, look, if you guys get tired of watching and you flip the TV, then it doesn't mean anything. And I think we all take it that we all look at the sport in a lot of ways sometimes, or a lot of us do, I'll say that. And especially our family we're very blessed that they're fans that watch this sport. That really want to see you go out and ride around in circles, that really want to pay attention to it. Because if not for them, then we wouldn't have a job. And that's how simple it is. So we've all kind of looked at it like it's a little bit of smoke and mirrors. Once the audience looks behind the curtain and sees that it's really not the Wizard of Oz, that there's a man working the handles, then everybody's going to go home.
You mentioned that each generation has different personalities, but one thing I think is a common thread to all your family is character, meaning that character, in my opinion, is doing the right thing when nobody's looking. And it seems like what you're doing with Victory Junction and all your charity work is kind of something that is a thread that connects your dad and your grandfather. And Adam was the one who wanted to start Victory Junction in the first place. Could you talk a little bit about that development?
Yeah, and I think that goes back to just as we started the conversation here. We grew up in a small town, in a rural community. And in the town that we're in, I never ever heard anybody refer to my father as Richard Petty. He's just Richard. Mm-hmm. He's just a guy that went to high school. He's just a guy that grew up and decided he was going to be a race car driver, and yes, he went on to be other things. But he lives in Randleman, North Carolina, and that's where we live, and that's where we moved back to. And when I was in school, I was never Richard Petty's son, I was just Kyle. And everybody helped everybody. It's just like I said, when we played football, we'd help people get up hay. We'd help people work in tobacco. At Christmas time, when there were underprivileged families, you helped people that were less fortunate than you. But that's a communal trait. You know, I would like to take credit for it and say it's a petty trait, and that it's there and that we kind of do that. But I think it's just because everybody we knew did it, and it just became commonplace. And you know, it was all about helping somebody else and helping your neighbor and people that were less fortunate. So we have been very blessed. My grandfather Petty and my grandmother Petty were mainstays in our community, and obviously my father grew up, and when we built the ballpark and did things there were a lot of things that he did for our community there. And then as I grew up, you know, my grandmother Owens from my mother's side, the things that we did at the church that we went to and that type of things. It was all about community. So when Adam came along, I think he had seen that through my parents and through myself and my wife Patty, and it just became a natural progression for him. And we were doing our motorcycle ride and other things. So the camp is just an extension of the multitude of generations.
Now, do you recall the conversation that you had with Adam when you were down in Florida
At Boggy
Paul
Creek,
Newman's
yeah.
Camp? And he said, "Hey, can we get this started?" And you said, "Well, we'll get your career started a little bit."
Yeah.
He'd already had these plans long before he cashed a paycheck in that racing.
Because, and I go back to the reason to that is we do our motorcycle ride, the charity ride across America. We've stopped at 20 some odd different hospitals. Well, Adam had been a part of that motorcycle ride for a couple of years. So he had gone into children's hospitals and helped us at children's hospitals. At the same time, he was driving for Sprint. They were doing a lot with Starbright and Starbright World and Starbright Foundation. So he was going to different children's hospitals all across the country. So it was funny when we went to Boggy Creek, his impression was, my God, we're already doing that. We're already visiting hospitals. Let's just build a camp. And basically the camp is a hospital. Let's just build a camp and bring kids to us. Instead of us going to them, let's bring the kids to us. And it was funny because sometimes you can't see the forest for the trees. We had been doing it this way for so many years, then all of a sudden he turned it around and said, let's look at it from this side. And it was amazing. So I think at that time, you know, I think he realized that what we were doing, what he was doing, what could be done was a lot bigger than what we were.
Kyle, at some point you affiliated with the Hole in the Wall gang, Paul Newman. How did that happen?
Just because we wanted to build a camp.
Yeah.
And basically our affiliation with Paul is I've driven a sports car with him a couple of times in a couple of different races. We won up at Watkins Glen. He and I won up at Watkins Glen with us. So, but it really became through the camp program. And it's a funny story because I called him up and I said, this is what we want to do. You know, after Adam's accident, we had talked about it a little bit before, but really the ball got rolling after Adam's accident. And I called him up and I said, this is what we want to do. And he called back and he said, here's what I'll do. I'll send my guys down there. You guys talk to them, lay it all out. We'll get it all worked out, and we'll go from there. So his guys came down. We had a meeting just like this, and his guys said, you know, we don't think you guys can raise the money. It's going to be really expensive. We just don't think that you guys are going to be able to raise the money and do what you think you can do. So we said, okay, and they said, well, what do you plan on doing? And we said, okay, we're going to build a camp. You're just not going to be a part of it now. So they went back and told Paul what we said, and Paul said, you guys are idiots. That's what they do. They raise money. They have to get sponsorship for their race cars. They raise money all the time. If anybody can raise money, they can raise money. So Paul called back and he said, hey, you guys got the green light. Go do whatever you need to do. So basically, that's been our working relationship with them. The Hole in the Wall gang group of camps, fundraisers that they have, we're always a part of. So it's been a great working relationship.
Again, in my research, in 2004, you were named one of the most caring athletes. I guess in our business, the media business, so oftentimes we hear about the negative aspect of athletes. You know, because of their publicity they receive, the money they make, that, you know, the media attention is something that they want, but they don't want to deal with, you know, like what you're doing right now.
Yeah.
They want to go to an event and get out of town.
Yeah. We're all that way.
But here you are, you know, taking time to do that. I just think it's a unique, I won't say, there are a lot of guys who do it, but,
Oh, yeah.
But in your case, I just think you extend that, you know, to the nth degree. I think you really make that effort, and I think that's, again, the character issue.
Yeah, but once again, I go back to our sport. I think that's part of our sport. And here's why I say this. Our sport's different. The structure of our sport is different than other sports. And what I mean by that is, if you play in the NFL or you play baseball, you have an owner. You work for that owner. You never, you very rarely hear baseball players or football players or basketball players, because they can be traded and they can be out of work. You never hear them talk about they don't play for that city. They really just play for that owner. You know, even when you're a Yankee, you play for Stein. You don't play for the city of New York, okay? When we race, then we race for whoever our sponsor is, okay? And it's a funny thing where our sponsor gives us money if they sell product. Well, we sign autographs and are nice to fans and to the media so that they buy the product, so the company makes money, so they send us more money. And that's the way it works. So we know who our boss is. Our boss is the fan. Our boss, even though we have a sponsor, our boss really is that guy sitting in the third row, or that woman sitting in the fifth row who goes out and buys Coca-Cola every week because she sees it on a race car. Our boss is that guy that buys that Dodge Charger. That's who our boss is. And I think that's been a funny part of our sport, because our sport, people really look at our sport and criticize our sport because it is a commercial sport, and it's blatantly commercial. But when it's blatantly commercial, you know where the buck stops and you know where the buck starts. And that's exactly the way it is. So for us, you know, and back to what your part of your original question was, you know, there are a lot more good athletes out there in every sport than there are bad. It's, once again, it's a squeaky wheel gets the grease. And it's that guy who does wrong. It's that guy who's in the wrong place at the wrong time that always gets the publicity, that always gets his name in the paper, and always gets the negative publicity. But nobody hears about the guy who visits the homeless shelter once a week. Nobody hears about the guy who does this because he doesn't do it for the publicity. He does it because it's the right thing to do.
Is winning NASCAR races and all that goes with that, when you, in the last 20 years, how does that compare to what you're doing now with the camp and all the stuff? Just I anticipate your answer, but
for what we do on Sundays, winning on a Sunday is the most important thing you do. That's how simple it is. That's why you race, is to win races. And I think every athlete feels that way. It's all about that. But if we have to take a white piece of paper and start prioritizing where winning races comes in, it comes in way down the list. It comes way, way down the list. I think what does come in is seeing those kids at camp, is talking to their parents, is being a role model for those kids, and all kids in general. It doesn't make any difference. So I think, you know, on that one day, for those 3 hours or 4 hours, whatever that race is, then that's your main goal. You know, when you're in that car, that's your main goal. But once you're out of that car, when you roll into camp on a Monday morning and see these kids eating breakfast in the dining room and in the dining hall, you realize you really didn't have a bad day on Sunday. You know what I mean? It puts life totally in perspective. So I think, you know, when you look at it like that, the most important thing in the big picture of life is the camp.
Were you surprised of the tremendous outpouring of support from your fellow racers?
The answer to that question would be surprise. I won't say surprise, okay? Because I know what a great group of guys they are. I know how great a guy Tony Stewart is, or Dale Jarrett, or Bobby Labonte, or Kevin Harvick, or Kurt Busch. People that get bad publicity are people that the fans don't like, are some of the greatest guys in the world. That's how simple it is. So I was gratified that they did what I thought they could do, and really what I thought they would do. And the surprise has come from the fans, for me. Because when Tony Stewart became a founding member, it was not only Tony Stewart that believed in the camp and saw the camp. All of his fans said, hey, if that's what Tony's going to do, that's what we're going to do. When Kevin Harvick did it, Kevin Harvick's fan club is one of the most giving, caring group of people I've ever run across in my life. They come to camp, they volunteer, they send stuff, they're constantly at camp. So when you look at it, I've been surprised by the fans. Yeah. I've been gratified by the drivers. And when you look at it, I guess I wanted and hoped and prayed that the drivers would be a part of it, because so many of them knew Adam too, and had known Adam since he was 7 or 8 years old. So they had an emotional connection to camp already, but the fans didn't. And once the fans joined in, even through corporate America, you can go back to all the sponsors, like I say, like Coke and people like that who have been a part of it, but the fans are the ones that have really built the camp.
how many campers will you have in '06?
This year we'll end up seeing right at, I want to say 2,700 kids. We started slow. First year we saw about 1,600 kids, or excuse me, about 600 kids. The second year, last year we saw about 1,800 kids, and this year we'll go up about another 1,000. And we're about maxed out right now. We see kids 38 weekends a year. There's kids at camp. So it's a year-long camp. Most people think about it just being a summer camp, but it's a year-long camp. We had our last group of kids at camp 2 weeks ago, as a matter of fact. We had our Christmas party last week. We had about 1,500 kids come back to our Christmas party, and then we start again the second week of January. So camp's a continuous live animal.
Now, how many days are you there when you're not involved in racing?
When I'm not, when I'm not at the racetrack, I try to go by always on Mondays and Tuesdays during the summer. During the weekends, when they do weekend retreats, obviously I'm never there. So I miss a lot of the weekends, but you see the kids there for the 12 or 14 weeks during the summer. Always on Monday and Tuesday. I try to be there on Monday morning to have breakfast with them, and then lunch, and then you'll go over and fish. And Tuesday night we have a carnival night, so I'm always there on Tuesday night. So those are the days that are important.
Do you have a favorite? If you could pick a favorite story, or there's just too many?
No, there's just about too many. You know, what the camp does, and I want to be real clear about what the camp really does. It's a camp for children with chronic and life-threatening diseases, not terminal.
Right.
These are diseases: asthma, spina bifida, hemophilia, arthritis. These are diseases are ailments they'll fight their entire life. What the camp really does, as much as anything for these kids, is just empowers them. These children are kids we get kids that come to camp who have never shot basketball because they weren't allowed to at school, or they didn't go to school, and they weren't chosen for a team. So when you put together a group of kids that have never been on a team and say, okay, you're the blue team and you're the red team, they go crazy. They go crazy because they've never played team sports. So it's pretty cool, but the thing is, it just empowers them to say, hey, I can shoot basketball. I can catch a fish. I can ride a horse. Never been able to do it before, but now I can do it. So I think that's the main thing. And there's so many great stories about kids catching fish for the first time or riding horses for the first time. It's just a good place.
What a wonderful legacy for Adam.
It's an incredible legacy. You know, and in the end, I don't, and I like to look at it and I say, you know, for us, it's been more personal. It keeps his memory alive. But the lives that has changed, you know, if we have been a part of over the period of, like I said, over a period of 2.5 years, we've been a part of 5,000 different children's lives. And when you can look back on that in 20 years and look at the numbers that hopefully you've touched their lives in a positive way, and they've, you know, paid forward and touched somebody else's lives in a positive way, then it is a huge legacy.
One final question or comment, one of the quotations that Adam made at one point, he said, the two men that I honor most are my father and God.
Yes.
I mean, what a...
Always God.
I mean, as a parent myself,
yeah.
I mean, when you hear that, it must give you chills.
Oh, it does. But that's, I go back to, and it was always good to hear things like that, because that's the way all of our kids are. You know, you always hope and pray, and you try to be that example for your own children, much less everybody else's children when you try to go out there, but your own children. And sometimes it always seems like it skips your children and goes straight to everybody else. But my daughter Montgomery Lee, my son Austin, they're just, you know, I'm a little biased, but they're just great kids, and Adam was always a great kid.
One more thing quick, and then Billy Race.
Yeah.
I covered him when he played football, played football for his dad, and then I remember he called me 2-3 years ago and said, "You never guess what I'm doing." And I guess as the story goes, he was working for a car dealership near Randleman, I guess.
Yeah, over in Winston.
And he was just talking one day, and somebody from your crew came in and started shooting the breeze, and as Billy tells me, they thought they were kidding, or he was kidding when he told them his name.
Yeah, everybody in our industry thinks he's kidding when he's talking. You know, and this is what Billy and I get along better than probably anybody I've ever gotten along with, and I think a lot of it is because of some of the stuff we've talked about here with my grandfather and my father and then myself. To grow up in this area with his father as a coach and who his father is, that's a long shadow in a small community. You know what I mean?
Yep.
And he had to grow up in that shadow, and he had to be who he is. And Billy is who he is, and Coach Race, Bill Race, is who he is. And it's cool to be around him. And I look at him sometimes, and I think about some of the same stuff as I started driving a race car and going to the racetrack with my father, and my father, you know, talking to me about racetracks and doing stuff like that. That's a special time in my life. And when I think about doing the same thing with Adam and going with him those first few years and talking about things like that, that's a special time for me. And for Billy to be able to go to school and play for his father and have your father be your coach, I don't think there's anything more important. Because as I look back to the coaches I had in high school and the people like that who molded me when I was in school, that's an important thing to do. So to have your coach and your father all be the same person, I think Billy's had a charmed life, and that's something that even if maybe shot to the inside, and as he shot to the inside, he saw the guy at the same time, and we both slowed down. And the guy, fortunate for us, the guy ran that way instead of running back across. He ran to the outside of the racetrack, jumped over that wall. And that's the weirdest thing that has ever happened, period. A man standing in the middle of the racetrack.
It's usually a deer at Pocono.
Yeah, at Pocono, that's true.
Stroker Ace.
Yeah.
You were involved in a movie star.
I wouldn't go so far as to say a movie star. Dale Earnhardt, myself, Ricky Rudd, and Tim Richmond. We all went down to shoot a scene for Stroker Ace. And that was, and the tie to that movie, and a lot of people forget the tie to that movie. The tie to that movie, that tied us all to that movie, was a guy named Hal Needham. And Hal Needham and Burt Reynolds came on board and came into the NASCAR series in the early 80s with a guy named Stan Barrett and the 33 Skoal Bandit. And that was their car. And then all of a sudden, Harry Gant made the car famous. But the first driver was a guy named Stan Barrett.
Burt Reynolds, did your paths cross with him?
Oh, yeah. Good guy. He used to come to races all the time. See, now we're going back 20, 25 years when people didn't pay any attention to the sport. When people didn't pay any attention to the sport, you had guys like that came to the sport and could come and hang out, and it was a great place for them to come because there wasn't all the media hype. You know what I mean? It was a good, relaxing place for a guy like Burt Reynolds or some of those other people to come to. Now, they get mobbed, so they don't do it as much.
So you're not going to see Paul Newman hanging around as much?
Not as much as you used to.
In the website, they got a thing that says, "Get a haircut, son." What was that all about?
They're always on the get a haircut thing. When I'm riding around the racetrack, people always scream at me, "Get a haircut." Okay, I thought that went out in like '72, so I always just scream back, "Lose some weight." Okay, so that's my comeback to get a haircut. All right.
They referred specifically to a race in Martinsville in 1991. where you had a hard crash, rescue workers had to remove you from the car.
Yeah, that's wrong. It was at Indy.
Indy, was it?
Yeah, the wreck was in Indy where the guy was standing on my hair.
Was it?
Yeah, that's a true story. The guy was standing on my hair.
How did it work? Just for the camera here?
Yeah, no. I was knocked out, and when the guy got me out of the race car, I was still half unconscious. And as he would lift me up, I would scream because I was unconscious, but I would. And then he would set me back down, and finally somebody told him if you get off his hair, he wouldn't scream when you try to lift him up. So the guy stepped off my hair, they lift me up, and that was the end of it. Yeah, that's true. I didn't know that was on the website.
Yeah, well, I'll give it to you.
Yeah, I don't read that stuff.
Everything else is very good.
And I ended up winning the ARCA race, but my father ended up winning the Daytona 500, and that was.
This has perhaps been one of the most.
The camp is a racing theme park, complete with horseback riding, a performing arts center, a water park, a Hendrick fuel
Is always going to be building.
From the Bass Pro Shop catch, kiss, and release, wonderful experience, thanks to the counselors and staff. This is not your typical camp staff. Here, a special group of counselors are trained in making sure all campers get a chance to live out their dream.
Just things they've dreamed of before, but they've always been told you can't do that. But here at Victory Junction, if they can dream it, they can achieve it.
Along with a staff of pediatric doctors and nurses, the Victory Junction Gang Camp has a fully equipped medical center. It is staffed 24 hours a day, handling any medical need, from bandaging a minor cut to providing chemotherapy.
Having the medical staff there that was so in tune to the details, of every little detail, made me feel so much better when I got there.
Parents can rest assured knowing the staff is trained and experienced in handling the needs of their chronically ill children. They do it with love, compassion, and they make it fun. Thanks to the many generous people across the country who came together and donated their time, money, and energy. Victory Junction is now a magical place that shows children they are capable of more than they ever imagined. For more information on the Victory Junction Gang Camp, visit our website or call 1-877-854-2267. Join the gang and feel your heart race.
Ha 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 ha!